Edgar grew up in a simple family of schoolteachers. They lived modestly, but his parents did their best to bring up their son well, to instill in him good qualities and habits. The only thing they could not give was financial well-being. But Edgar was able to achieve everything on his own. He tried his best, met the right people who steered him in the proper direction. And by his 40 years of age, Edgar was already the owner of a profitable business with an income of hundreds of thousands. 7 years ago, Edgar had the tragedy. His beloved wife and daughter died in a car accident. On that fateful autumn day, there was dense fog and the road was too slippery. The driver warned Edgar's wife that it was dangerous to drive out in such weather, but the woman insisted, as she had long promised to take her daughter to a children's performance. The driver had to agree, and everything ended up in a tragedy. A truck drove into the oncoming lane, the vehicle skidded, and the driver was unable to avoid a head-on collision. Edgar was deeply affected by the loss of his loved ones and decided that he would never be able to tie his life to someone else. The memories were too fresh and painful. So he lived alone with a Labrador, his lost daughter's pet. Kind and generous by nature, the man spent all his spare time doing charity work and helping homeless people and animals. But one day, a miracle happened in the businessman's life, and it brought him back to life. He couldn't believe it was possible. He met Chelsea, a young woman of 25 who was strikingly similar to his late wife. She was so enchanting that after meeting her, Edgar did not want to part with her. They met by chance. Chelsea was walking through the parking lot just at the moment when Edgar got out of his car. The girl was in high heels and accidentally twisted her ankle. The pain was so intense that she couldn't move. "Let me take you to the emergency room," suggested Edgar, who immediately came up to the beauty. "Oh, don't worry about it. I'll put ice on it at home and everything will be fine," smiled the woman. Edgar, of course, could not let her go and offered to give the stranger at least a ride home. On the way, they got to talking, and Edgar was surprised at how cheerful, confident and sociable the young woman was. When they discussed pets, she sadly told him that her Labrador had died several years ago. She could hardly hold back her tears when she was talking about her dog, and Edgar realized that he had met not only a beautiful and clever woman who was very similar to his deceased wife, but also a sincere person with similar interests. Thinking that he was very lucky, he immediately asked her out. The first date was followed by a second, third, and soon Edgar and Chelsea were practically not parting. They went everywhere together, and it was not important where to meet, in expensive restaurants or small eateries, walking around the city, going to exhibitions or shopping together for groceries. The affair was developing so rapidly that very soon Edgar introduced Chelsea to his friends as his bride. Only his friends and companions did not share his joy and did not understand how he could be so deeply attracted to the greedy, in their opinion, girl. They tried to warn Edgar not to make a mistake by marrying her, but the man explained these conversations as the envy of his friends, tired of their family life. Despite the disapproval of Edgar's entourage, the wedding took place, and after this, many have noticed how the man has changed. He became more open to communication, was always in a cheerful mood, and willingly visited friends, proudly boasting of his young wife. But time went on, and soon Edgar began to notice his wife's strange and unpleasant behaviour too. Chelsea became aloof, secretive, unkind, often avoiding intimacy with her husband under the guise of urgent matters. There was no longer that gleam in her eyes, which he had been so fascinated by when they first met. When she called someone or texted, she always went out into another room. One day, Edgar even noticed his wife being rude to his Labrador and realized that a person who truly loved animals was unlikely to do that. And that meant only one thing. Chelsea had tricked him for some reason the first time they met. It was around this time that Edgar hired a new gardener upon his wife's request. "Honey, I love roses so much. We have such a wonderful plot of land, a lot of space but no flowers, and the garden is kind of untended." She dreamily began a conversation once, trying to encourage her husband to changes. "I want to plant bushes and plenty of roses. I want the house to be drowned in roses." "Of course, my love. Everything will be just the way you want," agreed her husband without any suspicion. Thus, Spencer appeared in his house, and soon the owner began to notice how money and some valuable things began to disappear from the house little by little. Of course, these were small sums compared to his wealth, but Edgar, who had been used to knowing the value of money and controlling his spending since childhood, was not happy with such a state, and he was not going to tolerate thievery in his own house. The last thing Edgar wanted to think was that Chelsea was involved in the disappearance of the money. But before the arrival of this woman in his house, such cases had never occurred. In addition, the relationship between his wife and the gardener seemed suspicious to him. While Spencer was working in the garden, Chelsea behaved with him in a reserved, businesslike manner, as with the other staff, keeping the necessary distance. But as soon as they were in those places where they could not be seen from the windows, their style of communication changed abruptly, and they behaved as if they were old friends. Edgar was not ready to put up with being made a laughingstock and decided to gather evidence and reveal the strange couple. At first, he thought about hiring a private detective, but then he gave up the idea. He could not believe that his wife was capable of such a thing, and it seemed humiliating to the man to involve a stranger in the case. The whole situation greatly disturbed Edgar, and one day he could still not stand it and shared with his best friend. "You should check her out. Maybe you should play a trick on her to expose her," suggested his friend. Edgar liked the idea, and he decided to act. He staged an accident with his car, made sure that his wife was told about it urgently, and he spent a few days in a private hospital. After waiting a while, he returned home and, in an atypically loud voice, told a concerned Chelsea about the state of his health. "Darling, I'm lucky to be alive, but unfortunately my head injury is serious. The bump damaged my eardrums, and I lost my hearing. From now on, you should write me whatever you want to say, and from tomorrow I will start learning to read lips. I have already found a teacher," lied Edgar to his wife, who sighed heavily, showing how worried she was about him. "Oh, how terrible it is! Why do you have to go through all this?" wailed Chelsea, smearing fake tears on her face. Of course, Edgar heard everything, but from that day on the man had to be very careful not to give himself away, and to be able to listen freely to everything his wife talked about with the gardener. He quickly discovered that this Spencer was no gardener, but a long-time associate of his wife. They were lovers, and had long been deceiving wealthy men. Now their victim was to be Edgar. They carefully gathered all the information about his interests and habits. Chelsea even had to dye her hair to look more like his late wife. The woman was a master of the art of seduction and could captivate absolutely any man. The swindlers set up everything so that Edgar would definitely pay attention to Chelsea, and then she turned on all her charm and skill. Having gained the trust, the criminals were going to poison the businessman, but fortunately, his sudden deafness blunted their vigilance. The woman stopped hiding from her husband when she talked on the phone with her accomplice, but in front of strangers pretended to be a hospitable hostess so as not to give reasons for gossip. One day, Chelsea suggested that her husband go on a picnic together. The day before, Edgar had overheard his wife and the gardener discussing the murder plan in great detail, and he had prepared well for the event. "Your favourite wine, dear, for good spirits," cheered Chelsea, holding out a glass of the poisoned drink to her husband. As his wife turned away, Edgar exchanged the glass for another and made a toast. "I raise this glass to my wife Chelsea, who decided to poison me." The smile slowly slid from Chelsea's lips. The woman turned pale and began to shiver. "Yes, my dear, I am not deaf, and I know everything. And rest assured, you and your lover will not escape punishment." "I'm sorry. Forgive me. I didn't mean—" Chelsea fell to her knees, begging for forgiveness, but Edgar only looked at her coldly and waved his hand at someone. Immediately the police, who had been waiting in ambush the whole time, appeared and arrested Chelsea. Spencer was also arrested half an hour later. As it turned out, the international police had been looking for the couple for a long time, but never managed to catch them red-handed. Edgar immediately divorced the con artist and tried to erase all memories of her from his life.